I had just stepped out of the taxi in front of my grandfather's porch when the wooden door swung open. Cold air rushed out, carrying his familiar voice deep, slow, but sharp enough to slice through the afternoon. "Why did you come by taxi?" He looked me up and down. "Where is the Mercedes I bought for you?" The question landed like a crack across a polished glass surface. I opened my mouth, ready to explain why a car, something he had chosen down to every detail to keep me safe while I worked, had disappeared from my life. But I didn't even have time to breathe. From behind him, another voice spoke. Soft, smooth, far too familiar. "Mom let Tiffany use it. She needs it more. Her job requires her to show up looking presentable. No one asked for my opinion. No one asked for my permission." And in that exact moment, standing on those icy front steps, I understood something clearly. What had just been taken wasn't only a luxury car, it was the final boundary I had been trying to hold on to. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching this story from? If you've ever had something taken from you with just one sentence that sounded perfectly reasonable, stay, because right beyond that door, everything began to shift. But that moment on the front steps still wasn't the worst of it. Inside the house, the familiar warmth didn't make me feel any better. The smell of old coffee and polished wood lingered in the air, as if everything were still in its proper place except me. My grandfather walked slowly into the living room. My mother followed, her smile so neat it didn't tremble at all. My younger sister stood near the dining table, her phone face down, her eyes flicking toward me as if I had stepped into the middle of a scene already arranged. No one asked if I was cold. No one asked if the trip had been exhausting. In my family, there was a familiar label attached to me, the reliable one. It sounded kind, but in truth, it meant the one who always manages. When an unexpected bill showed up, I handled it. When something urgent came up, I arranged it. When someone needed to front a little money to smooth things over, my mother's eyes turned to me, almost by reflex. She spoke in sentences no one ever argued with. "Family has to support each other. You're more stable. It's only temporary." My father sat quietly in the corner, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't object. He didn't agree either. He simply avoided looking at me, as if silence were the safest way to let everything pass. There was one detail that night that kept me from sleeping. My sister, Tiffany, talked about her job with constant excitement. Photo shoots, filming schedules, collaboration calendars. Everything required visuals. Everything required looking good. The Mercedes, according to my mother, was just transportation. According to Tiffany, it was an investment, a tool to make everything look more professional on screen. I stood there, my hands still cold. No one asked how I would manage my deliveries. No one mentioned that the car was tied to every order, every small contract I had built on my own, as if my work didn't need to look good to be considered real. That night, I returned to the workshop later than usual. The familiar space, the smell of old wood, the warm yellow light, everything was the same. Only the feeling inside me had changed. I opened my laptop, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. A deduction line appeared, then another. The familiar note: advance, shared expenses. I stared at the screen. I didn't panic. I just saw one thing with absolute clarity. Those numbers didn't match any decision I remembered making. And I had no idea that the moment I dug deeper into that statement, everything began to turn. My mornings began with the sound of the workshop door being pulled up, metal screeching softly in the cold air of Grand Rapids. The smell of pine mixed with fine dust clung to my sleeves. I checked the order list, each handwritten line, every delivery deadline I had promised. No assistant, no camera crew, just me and planks of wood that had to be cut to the exact size. I lifted the boards, measured them again, tightened the screws. A client stopped by and asked if I could deliver before the weekend. I nodded. I always did. I nodded even when my back ached, even when my schedule was packed tight. My phone vibrated. A short message from my mother. Remember to stop by this afternoon. No explanation. No asking if I was busy. I set the phone down and turned back to the saw table. My work had always run parallel to things that were never really mine. The first time I paid a bill that wasn't mine, my mother spoke very gently. Just this once. The electric company sent it to the wrong place. I transferred the money, without much thought. Then came the second time. Your father is waiting for a tax refund. I transferred the money, still without asking. After that, the reasons became so familiar they no longer needed an introduction. Insurance money, plumbing repairs, a deposit so no one would be inconvenienced. Each time, I told myself I was doing it for the family, because I could, because I was more stable. No one acknowledged it. No one paid it back. There was only one sentence, repeated often enough, soft enough to avoid any argument. You understand. And I did understand. I understood that if I didn't speak up, everything would automatically pass through me. But that wasn't the only time. Tiffany called me one late evening. Her voice was excited, fast, full of energy. Hey, I need an advance. There's an urgent campaign. I asked how much. She said the amount as if reading from a prepared note. Mom said you'd transfer it for me. I have a contract next week. I looked around the workshop. Unsealed boxes. Material invoices still unpaid. I transferred the money. A few days later, I saw the Mercedes appear in one of Tiffany's videos. Beautiful lighting. Smooth angles. The comments were full of praise. No one mentioned me. No one said that the car had originally been used to haul wood, carry supplies, deliver the small orders that kept my workshop alive. My work didn't need to look good. It just needed to endure. And for the first time, I asked myself if this was an investment, then who was paying the price for it without the Mercedes? Everything slowed down in a very real way. The deliveries I used to handle with ease suddenly became a problem to solve. I called taxis, then rented cargo vans by the hour. Each time, the meter ran faster than I expected. A client messaged to ask why an order was late. I apologized. I see it was a transportation issue. No one asked further, but I knew an apology doesn't preserve credibility for long. I dragged heavy crates closer to the workshop door, waiting for the vehicle to arrive. My back hurt. My hands burned. In my head, I counted scattered figures: rental fees, extra charges, the portion of profit that had just evaporated. No one in my family saw any of this. They only saw a reasonable decision being made, and me, as always, managing on my own. I began to notice the word temporary. It appeared in every conversation. Temporary use of the car, temporary advance, temporary inconvenience. But temporary never returned to the starting line. It only slid forward, stacking on itself, until it became the default. Every time I thought about speaking up, a familiar voice cut in. It's family. Don't make a big deal out of it. Everything will be fine. I looked around the workshop at the end of the day, when yellow light spilled across the sawdust-covered floor. Nothing here was temporary. Everything I built required time, money, and labor. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask if I keep staying silent, who will pay the price in the end? That night, I opened the statements again, not to look for mistakes, but to understand. The familiar notes appeared: shared expenses, advance, reimbursement later. Dates repeated themselves. The amounts weren't large, but they were consistent. I cross-checked them with my work schedule. Some charges appeared on days I was out making deliveries. Some landed exactly when Tiffany posted new content. No conclusion was necessary, but the pieces began to fit. I sat there for a long time, not angry, not panicked, just one clear, cold, lucid realization. These numbers were not random, and if I added them all up, perhaps I would have to face a truth I had been avoiding for far too long. If I added them all together, what would the total actually reveal? At night, my workshop was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking out of rhythm. Most of the overhead lights were turned off, leaving only a single yellow bulb casting light over the work table. Sawdust lay still like snow that had fallen too early, covering the footprints I had made during the day. I sat down in the chair. I didn't turn on music. I didn't pick up my phone. I let the silence do its work. Here, no one needed me to be understanding. No one texted to ask if I could manage a little more. No one looked at me with the default assumption that I would say yes. I rested my hand on the wooden surface, where scratches overlapped, layered by years. They weren't beautiful, but they were real. And for the first time that day, I didn't need to prove that I was useful. I don't remember exactly when I became the reliable one. I only remember that whenever something happened, every pair of eyes turned to me first. It had been that way since I was young. If someone needed to stay behind and clean up, I stayed. If someone had to sacrifice their plans, I was the one who changed my schedule. No one ever gave an order. There was only a familiar silence, and I stepped into it on my own. My mother once said to me in a completely ordinary tone, "You're stronger." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Only later did I understand it was the gentlest way to hand me more responsibility. I learned not to ask why it was always me. I learned not to show exhaustion. I learned to smile when people relied on me. And gradually, the fact that I always held steady became the reason others didn't need to stand beside me. I used to think silence was how you kept a family together. There were moments when I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Not because I was tired, but because I had become too used to not being allowed to be tired. I asked myself how long it had been since I said no without attaching an apology. How long since I nodded before listening to my own body. How long since I treated endurance as a form of morality. If you're listening to this story and feel your chest tighten, maybe you've been like me too. The one who keeps the rhythm. The one who carries the heavier load so the rest of the room can stay calm. We get praised for being strong, but no one asks what that strength actually costs. I stood in the workshop, light spilling across the wooden floor, and for the first time I allowed myself to consider another possibility, that protecting myself was not betrayal. That staying silent for too long was not love. It was simply disappearing politely. In my mind, I saw my grandfather Walter standing beside the old wooden table in the garage. He didn't talk much. He just watched the way I measured, cut, then nodded. "Do your work properly," he once said. "But don't let anyone treat your effort as a given." Back then, I smiled. I thought he was worrying too much. Now I understood. He wasn't teaching me how to endure. He was teaching me how to stand upright. That thought lingered for a long time in the dark workshop. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough for me to know what was coming next would no longer stay in silence. The next morning, a phone call pulled me out of the workshop and brought everything into the light. The phone vibrated at 7:12 in the morning. Too early for a check-in, too precise for a favor. "I need you to transfer an amount for me." Denise's voice came through, even and firm, as if the decision had already been made the night before. "It's just in advance. They're waiting on the other end." I stood in the workshop, sawdust still clinging to my hands, staring at the crooked calendar on the wall. One order had to be delivered before noon. One materials invoice was still unpaid. When will it be returned? I asked. There was half a beat of silence on the line. You always manage. That familiar sentence fell into place, light as habit. I inhaled. For the first time, I didn't answer right away. After I hung up, the workshop suddenly felt louder. The saw cutting, wood knocking, metal striking metal, everything seemed to push me to hurry, to choose. I opened my banking app. The amount wasn't large, but it sat in exactly the place I used to breathe between orders. In my head, two voices pulled in opposite directions. One whispered, "Just this once." The other was cold and clear. "Every time is this once." I set the phone down. I didn't transfer the money. I didn't text back. Not out of anger, but because I needed to know if I didn't nod right away, what would actually happen. I drove to Walter's house as the sun was just coming up. He opened the door, looked at me a second longer than usual, then stepped aside. "Take your time," he said. I didn't tell much, just about the advances, the returns that were always promised, the things that disappeared without anyone naming them. Walter sat still, his hands folded together. When I finished, he stood up, pulled open a drawer, and placed an empty folder on the table. "If you want the truth," he said slowly, "we'll need paperwork, all of it." Walter pushed the folder toward me. His eyes didn't pressure me, but they carried enough weight for me to understand if I opened this now, there would be no going back to the way things were. And that was the moment I knew it was time to look straight at the numbers. I opened my laptop right there in the workshop. No music, no overhead lights, just the glow of the screen reflecting off the scratches in the wooden table. Month after month of statements appeared, small amounts, repeated. The familiar notes shared expenses. Advance, will be returned. I printed them out, sorted them by date, by amount. The thin sheets of paper grew heavier in a very specific way. In another corner, my phone kept vibrating. I didn't look. I just kept gathering what had once been called by gentler names than the truth. The truth always leaves traces. The messages came faster. From my mother, then from Tiffany. "Did you transfer it yet?" "They're waiting. Don't make things difficult right now." The tone was no longer soft, no longer pretending to check in. There was only one unspoken understanding left. I was supposed to fix it. I placed the phone face down. For the first time, I realized my silence was no longer seen as kindness. It was being treated as defiance. I brought the stack of papers to Walter's house. He didn't read them in a hurry. He turned each page slowly and precisely. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" he asked. I nodded, without hesitation, because if I stopped here, everything would be called by the old names again, and I would once more be the one carrying the silence. I signed my name on the cover page. Not an impulsive decision, but a boundary set late, yet unmistakably clear. Walter closed the folder. He didn't look at me right away, only said as if reminding himself, "When you set boundaries, they won't thank you." I understood, but this time, I didn't need approval. I only needed the truth and the right to not have anything taken from me ever again. If you're still watching at this point, comment 1 so I know you're still here and that this story matters to you. Walter's house was quieter than usual. He pulled the dining table to the center of the room, clearing the surface of the wood darkened by years. No flowers, no water, nothing to distract. I set the stack of files down. The printed pages still smelled of ink. Walter arranged them into thin piles, by month, by type of expense. He worked slowly, evenly, as if measuring a piece of wood again before cutting. "We don't need raised voices," he said. We just need to be correct. The door opened. Denise walked in first, her perfume arriving before her voice. Raymond followed, shoulders slightly hunched. Tiffany came in last, phone still in hand. No one greeted anyone. No one sat down right away. Walter pointed to the chairs. Sit. I took a breath and placed my hands on my thighs. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prepare an apology. Walter opened the first folder. He didn't read quickly. He pointed. 3 years, he said, cash flow repeating on a monthly cycle. He turned the papers toward them. Small amounts, regular. Notes identical enough to be suspicious advance, shared expenses, reimbursement. In total, he continued, his voice unchanged. This is not a mistake. Denise gave a light laugh. Over 3 years. Everyone borrows sometimes. We're family. Walter didn't argue. He opened the second folder. Date comparisons. On the same day Hannah made deliveries, money left the account. On the same day Tiffany posted content expenses appeared. He drew a thin line with a pencil. This is a repeating pattern. Raymond looked down at the table. He didn't object. He didn't confirm. His silence weighed as much as an answer. Tiffany shifted in her seat. That was an investment. I bring image value. Walter nodded, as if acknowledging a data point, then opened the third folder. Investments generate returns. This does not. He turned another page. This was no longer a bank statement, but a summary table he had compiled himself. Timelines marked in pencil. Each mark aligned with a specific event: the day I delivered a large order, the day Tiffany posted a new campaign, the day I was forced to use a taxi instead of the Mercedes. If it happened once, we could call it coincidence, Walter said, but when it repeats long enough, evenly enough, it becomes a system. No one argued, because by now, the numbers no longer stood alone. They lined up, pointing straight at the same truth. Denise leaned back. She's always sensitive about money. She's fine. Walter looked at me. I want to hear from Hannah. I spoke slowly. I'm fine because I'm forced to be fine. No raised voice. No shaking. Tiffany shrugged. If it was that hard, why didn't you say something sooner? I met her gaze. Every time I did, the answer was temporary. Silence dropped into the room. Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it. Walter set the pencil down. Denial doesn't make numbers disappear. Blame doesn't change timelines. He closed the folders, one stack at a time. The room was so quiet you could hear paper touching wood. No one won. But no one could say they didn't know anymore. Walter opened the final folder. Not statements, not summaries. Device and signature cross-checks. He placed 2 printouts side by side. One was Tiffany's posting schedule hour, minute, location. The other was my account login log, the exact times transactions were confirmed. Look here, Walter said. The timestamps matched to the minute. Denise leaned forward. This could be misunderstood. Walter nodded. I hoped it would be. Then he turned to the next page. Delivery receipts. Photos of vehicle locations. Timestamps showing I was at delivery points while money left my account to pay for Tiffany's campaign. No explanation was needed. The numbers spoke for themselves. Tiffany went silent. Her phone lay face down on the table, dark for the first time. Walter opened another thin envelope. Inside were printed emails and granted access permissions. This is authorization, he said, pointing to the digital signature. Not to withdraw funds, but to schedule automatic payments. The IP markers were circled. They matched locations where Tiffany had live-streamed. They even matched time windows when I was in the warehouse. Unable to touch my phone. Denise flipped pages faster than necessary. Tiffany stared at one line of text. then looked away. No one talked about misunderstandings anymore, because what remained didn't need interpretation, it only needed acknowledgement. Denise sighed. I just wanted everything to pass smoothly, Walter asked immediately. Then why wasn't it returned? Denise looked at Tiffany. Tiffany answered quickly. I meant to return it, but never did. Walter cut in, gently but decisively. Raymond cleared his throat softly. We all have hard times. Walter didn't turn to him. Hard times don't create patterns. The room grew heavier. Each new sentence collided with the one before it. Tiffany bit her lip. You benefited too. I brought image value. I replied for the first time in this section. Very briefly. There was no contract. No one countered. The truth stood close enough that it didn't need more words. I stood up. Not to raise my voice. Just to set a boundary. From today, I said, all spending through my account ends. I looked directly at Tiffany. No advances. Then at Denise. No temporary. Walter placed a document in front of them. A repayment schedule with clear deadlines. If this isn't followed, he said, I will forward the file to the family lawyer. Denise froze. Raymond lowered his head. I signed my name. No shaking. No hesitation. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was reclaiming ownership of my own life. Walter placed the final folder on the table. One more thing, he said, and this will be made public. The news didn't arrive as a declaration. It came in short, fragmented calls. A partner asking about schedules. A client asking about an invoice. An acquaintance asking very quietly, Is everything okay? I didn't give details. I just said, We're reviewing things. Within a few days, Tiffany's work calendar began to empty. No noise, no drama, just one rescheduled meeting after another, and then silence. Denise called me more often. Her voice was no longer firm. The familiar openings mom needs, just this once disappeared, replaced by incomplete questions that never quite landed. I kept working, delivering on time, meeting deadlines. No one needed an explanation to see that something had shifted. An email from one of Tiffany's former partners landed in my inbox by mistake. They were asking to confirm payment terms. I forwarded it. With a single line, please work directly with the person in charge. Then came a call from a supplier. They asked why the previous invoices had been issued under my name. I told the truth, briefly, without escalating anything. That process has ended. No one argued. They simply acknowledged it over the phone. Because when paperwork changes, the questions change with it. On the other side, Tiffany posted something vague about challenges. No names mentioned. But the engagement was noticeably lower. The truth doesn't need defending. It only needs the right place to stand. Another call came this time from the accounting department of a former partner. She didn't ask who was right or wrong. She only asked, from now on, who is authorized to sign? When I said my name, there was a brief pause on the line. Then she said, Thank you. That makes things clearer. Clear sometimes that's the most frightening thing for people who are used to living in the gray. The truth doesn't need to shout. Denise showed up at the workshop one late afternoon. She stood at the threshold, not stepping inside, as if she knew a new boundary had just been set. How far are you going to take this? She asked. I didn't argue. I just replied. As far as it needs to go to be right. She exhaled. For the first time, I saw her without a backup plan. No softening words. No one stepping in to handle it. Raymond sent a short message. Dad is sorry for staying silent. I read it. I didn't reply right away. Some apologies need time before they carry weight. Control doesn't disappear with a single fall. It leaves when people stop nodding along. I changed the workshop locks, updated the contracts. Each change was small, but consistent. When people asked, I didn't tell the story. I only explained the new process, the new timelines, the things that could be verified. Walter stopped by and placed a box of tea on the table. He didn't ask anything else. He just watched the way I worked, then nodded. At the end of the day, I closed the workshop earlier than usual. The air was still, no phone vibrating, no incoming requests. I understood then that the greatest consequence wasn't public loss. It was everything returning to its proper place and standing there. I no longer had to explain why I deserved respect. But this quiet was only the beginning of another ending. The morning began earlier than usual. Thin sunlight streamed through the workshop windows, touching the still cool concrete floor. I opened the door, and the familiar scent of wood and paper dust rushed out unhurried, undemanding. The kettle hummed softly. I brewed tea and stood still for a beat, listening to the street wake up outside. No phone vibrating, no crowded schedule pressing in. On the table lay a handwritten task list from the night before. Short, clear. I crossed off one line, then began. No one needed to remind me. No one needed to push me. This quiet wasn't an absence, it was a rhythm. I opened the window a little wider. A breeze moved through, carrying the smell of toasted bread from the corner shop and the sound of a delivery truck slowly backing up. Very small sounds, very ordinary sounds I had rarely had time to notice before. I realized I was no longer counting hours in anxiety, but in things completed. When a morning can pass like this without demands, without anyone borrowing the word family that isn't avoidance, it's stability. The workshop was more orderly than before. New shelves were labeled, contracts sorted by month. Every compartment had its limit. I worked at a steady pace. Measure, cut, take notes. The familiar sounds, the blade sliding through board, the pen touching paper became the baseline rhythm. Walter stopped by mid-morning. He set a box of tea in the corner of the table, looked around, and nodded. No praise, no reminders, just quiet acknowledgement. I sent invoices on time, received brief replies. Everything moved without explanation. A message came in. One line. From Denise. When are you free to talk? I checked my calendar. I replied. Not this week. When there's a suitable time, I'll let you know. Nothing added, nothing softened. Another email asked about expenses like before. I replied with the new process, attaching the terms. No emotion, no debate. Boundaries aren't closed doors. They are clear schedules, transparent terms, and time that is respected. At the end of the day, I turned off the workshop lights early. Darkness settled gently, without dragging worry along with it. I used to think peace was something you had to fight for, to prove yourself worthy of. But it turns out, peace is what remains when you stop trying to be accepted. I didn't win against anyone in this story. I simply chose not to lose to myself one more time. And that was enough. If you've listened this far, there was probably a moment in this story that made you slow down. Maybe it was the moment something that belonged to you was taken away with a reason that sounded perfectly reasonable. Or the moment you realized you had stayed silent for far too long just to keep the peace. I'm not telling this story to prove who was right, only to say this sometimes. The bravest thing you can do is reset your boundaries. Everyone's boundary is different. For some, it's money. For some, it's time. For others, it's respect. What about you? What was the moment that made you realize that if you didn't say stop, you would keep losing yourself? If you want, share your story in the comments. Not to argue, just to be heard. And tell me, where are you watching this story from? Every city, every country carries stories like this. Only the names change. If this story made you nod, leave a line. You are not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and powerful life stories with you. See you in the next story.